Tonight's story is one that left me breathless the first time I lived it, and it might leave you questioning everything you know about family. Let me ask you something. If your loved one was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for his life, and you called out for help, would your family show up? Or would they send you a text saying they were too busy? I never thought I'd find out the answer that way. It was 2:13 a.m. when the doctor told me they didn't know if my brother would make it through the night. He had been in a car accident, and by the time I got the call, he was already in surgery. Alone. Unconscious. Tubes everywhere. I was in the hospital hallway, shivering under those sterile fluorescent lights, clutching my phone like a lifeline. My hands were shaking. I texted my sister, "Please. Come. It's serious. I'm scared. He's in emergency surgery." A few minutes later, the screen lit up. "We're busy with Margaret." That was it. No follow-up. No. "How bad is it?" Not even a question. Just those 4 words, as cold as the floor I was standing on. Before I could even process it, another message came in. "You always exaggerate everything. Just handle it like an adult." And then she stopped replying. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Or maybe it wasn't a crack, maybe it was a shift. A realization. I wasn't the family's emotional one. I wasn't the problem. I was the placeholder. The one they used when it was convenient. The one they ignored when it wasn't. My brother could die tonight, and they'd rather sip wine and laugh with Margaret than come see him. I leaned against the wall, staring at my reflection in a vending machine, trying not to cry. Not because I was sad, but because I was done. Done waiting for them to care. Done begging for their attention. Done pretending I belonged. So let me ask again. If your family turned their back on you during your darkest hour, what would you do next? Stay tuned, because I didn't walk away empty-handed. And if you've ever felt overlooked, unappreciated, or shoved to the side by the people who are supposed to love you the most, don't forget to like, subscribe, and support HD Reddit Stories. Because here your story matters. And so does your voice. Growing up, I used to believe family meant safety. That no matter how cruel the world became, no matter how far I fell, there would always be arms to catch me. That illusion didn't break overnight, it eroded, one moment at a time. But looking back, the cracks had always been there. I just refused to see them. From the time we were kids, the hierarchy in our house was clear. Margaret, older, prettier, more polished, was the sun around which everything revolved. My parents doted on her like she was a rare gem, and in every family photo, you could practically see the pride beaming off of them as they stood next to her. Me? I was the blurry one on the edge of the frame, always mid-blink, always trying to squeeze into a space where I was never really invited. It wasn't that I didn't try. I brought home good grades, cleaned up after dinner, stayed out of trouble. I even defended Margaret at school once when she got into a fight, took the blame myself so she wouldn't get detention. My mom said thank you once, then never mentioned it again. Margaret got a spa weekend for being under stress. I used to think if I was just a little quieter, a little more helpful, they'd notice me the way they noticed her. But no matter what I did, I never measured up. Margaret shined. I blended. When our older brother Theo had his motorcycle accident 4 years ago, it was like the universe handed me a chance to step up, to prove my worth. He came out of surgery with spinal injuries that left him partially immobile. The first few weeks were terrifying. He needed help with everything, eating, dressing, moving. I dropped everything. I took leave from work, moved into the house he was renting, slept in a chair by his bed for weeks. At first I told myself, this is what family does. This is the moment everything changes. They'll see I'm not useless. They'll see I'm reliable. But no one came. Margaret sent flowers. My sister visited once, for 20 minutes, then posted a picture on social media with the caption, "Family first, 2 hearts." That post got hundreds of likes. Meanwhile, I spent my nights wiping blood from Theo's bandages and learning how to inject his medication properly. I wasn't angry. Not then. Just tired. So tired. But I kept going. I learned to manage his schedule, fought with insurance companies, argued with doctors for better options, and even took on a part-time remote job so I could cover what his health plan didn't. Margaret? She was vacationing in the Maldives. My sister was planning a wedding. My parents, who now lived in Florida, sent a couple of checks and called maybe once a month to ask if Theo was getting back on his feet yet. They always made it sound like recovery was some kind of personal failure. As if Theo just wasn't trying hard enough. When I brought it up to Margaret once, asked if she might take a weekend to help, she laughed. Not cruelly, just carelessly. "You're so sensitive," she said. "You've always been like that. It's not a good look." It was like being stabbed with a marshmallow. Soft on the outside, but underneath, I was bleeding. The worst part was Theo could see it. Even through the pain, even when he was at his lowest, he'd whisper, "You're doing great, you know." He was the only one who did. But being the forgotten sibling comes with side effects. One day, I overheard Margaret talking on the phone. She didn't know I was standing behind the door. "She doesn't have a real job," she said. "She's basically freeloading off Theo while playing nurse. And the worst part? She thinks she's a martyr." I didn't confront her. I didn't cry. I just walked away, back to the room where Theo needed his next dose of meds. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and wondered what would happen if I just left. If I packed my things and disappeared. Would anyone notice? Would anyone care? But I couldn't do that to Theo. Not him. Not when he looked at me with gratitude in his eyes, even when he couldn't lift his arms. He was the only one who never made me feel invisible. He saw me. And for that I stayed. Still, the resentment began to simmer. At family gatherings, rare as they were, I was always the one cooking, serving, clearing plates. Margaret sat pretty in the center, talking about her business ventures, her investments, her charity work. The same charity work that used pictures of me and Theo on the campaign page to show compassionate family values. I was branding material, apparently. Just not family. Every once in a while, someone would say, "You're such a good sister." And I'd smile. But deep down, it felt hollow. Because being a good sister wasn't something I chose, it was something I had to do. Because if I didn't, no one would. Then came the worst day. Theo's condition worsened unexpectedly. He fell unconscious in the middle of the afternoon, and I called an ambulance. I rode with him, holding his hand the entire way, trying not to fall apart. At the ER, they took him straight into surgery. I was left alone in the waiting room, surrounded by strangers who had people to call, people who would show up. I didn't have anyone. Still, I reached for my phone. I texted my sister. I texted Margaret. I even texted my parents, though I hadn't spoken to them in weeks. Only one person replied. Margaret. "We're busy with Margaret." Just like that. And suddenly, everything I had buried, every slight, every forgotten birthday, every ignored phone call, came roaring to the surface like a tidal wave. I wasn't family. I was furniture. Useful when needed. Forgotten when not. And in that moment I made a silent vow. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to explain myself to people who decided I didn't matter. They thought I'd always be there. They were wrong. Grief has many shapes, but one of the cruelest is the kind that comes while someone is still alive. I didn't lose Theo that night in the emergency room, but something else did die inside me. Not just hope. Something more personal. The naive belief that maybe, somehow, the people I called family might choose me too. That they might see the weight I carried and help lift it. That illusion was gone now. Replaced by silence, avoidance, and calculated disregard. No one followed up the next day. No one called. No flowers, no messages, no awkward but well-meant check-ins. Theo was still recovering in the ICU, and I was still sleeping in plastic chairs and chasing down nurses for updates. I lived on vending machine snacks and caffeine, while my sister uploaded another brunch photo captioned, "Grateful for calm weekends." I didn't even bother texting them again. A week later, I saw it on Instagram, a gleaming photo of Margaret's newly remodeled dining room, aglow in soft lighting, her famous marble-topped buffet table laid out with a catered dinner. My parents were in the background, sipping wine. My sister posed near the fireplace. The caption read, "Family night." Couldn't ask for more. I zoomed in. There was a space set for 6 people. Theo and I weren't among them. I stared at that image longer than I cared to admit. Not because I expected an invite, I didn't. But because it proved something I'd suspected for a long time but hadn't wanted to accept: we were invisible. Theo and I didn't count. We didn't fit their picture-perfect narrative, so they simply edited us out. Later that month, I found out my parents had flown into town. Not because they called me, oh no. I learned through an accidental email from Margaret. She'd forwarded a confirmation to their driver, copying me by mistake. I stared at the itinerary: pick up from the airport, drop off at Margaret's house, full-day agenda for her charity gala. I texted my mom. "Didn't know you were visiting. Would love to see you if you're free." No response. I called my dad. He picked up, sounded startled. "Oh yeah," he said, like he was fumbling for a lie. "We meant to tell you. It was just a quick trip. It's been over a year," I replied. "You haven't seen Theo since the accident." He went quiet. "We've been, just overwhelmed with everything." I almost laughed. Overwhelmed. They weren't there for the surgery. They hadn't helped with the insurance claims, or the hospital bills, or the dozens of complications afterward. They hadn't seen Theo cry after wetting himself, or watched me carry him into the bathroom like a child. But they were the ones overwhelmed. Then came the real gut punch. Margaret organized a Zoom call. "Family financial update," she said. "Just to keep everyone in the loop." I almost didn't join. But curiosity, and maybe a pinch of masochism, got the better of me. The screen lit up with perfectly framed faces: Margaret in her home office, my parents sitting side by side in their Florida condo, my sister sipping tea like she was in a commercial. Margaret launched into a slideshow. She spoke like a TED Talk presenter, confident, charming, rehearsed. She outlined how she'd streamlined the estate, consolidated assets, maximized tax efficiencies, and repositioned retirement accounts. It all sounded very impressive, very professional, until she showed the revised inheritance structure. My name wasn't there. Neither was Theo's. I blinked, thinking maybe I missed a slide. Maybe it was a mistake. "Margaret," I asked, unmuting myself, "can you go back one slide?" She did. Slowly. Still nothing. I tried again, my voice calm. "Where's Theo's share? Or mine?" Silence. My sister looked away. Margaret blinked. "There are specific trust arrangements in place. You wouldn't understand the legalities. Explain it anyway." "There's no need for this tone," she replied. "Let's discuss this offline." Then, without warning, she clicked a button and removed me from the meeting. I stared at my laptop, stunned. I tried to rejoin. Access denied. I sat there for a long time, just still. Like my body didn't know how to process the betrayal. Not just the exclusion. Not just the disregard. But the quiet, methodical decision to erase us. They hadn't just forgotten Theo and me. They'd drawn a line around themselves and shut the door. And the most twisted part? I don't think they even saw it as cruel. In their eyes, they were just being pragmatic. Why waste resources on the weak links? On the ones who didn't shine, didn't perform, didn't bring in praise or returns? I spent that night staring at Theo while he slept, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I thought about everything we'd lost. Our mobility. Our home. Our sense of belonging. I thought about how many nights I'd stayed up, researching treatment options, fighting to get him better. And I thought about the people who had all the power to help, and chose not to. That was the night the disappointment stopped being passive. It became fuel. I realized I'd been playing by their rules for too long. Hoping they'd change. Hoping I could earn their love like it was some kind of prize. But they were never going to see me. They had already decided who mattered and who didn't. And from that moment on, I decided I was done waiting for a seat at their table. I'd build my own. It's one thing to be forgotten. It's another thing entirely to be used. After being removed from the Zoom call like some unwanted participant in a corporate meeting, I spent days trying to make sense of it all. I wasn't angry yet, just stunned. Like my brain was still buffering. But the fog didn't last long. Because disrespect doesn't just come in grand gestures, it's in the small, grinding moments that wear you down until you start questioning if you're even human in their eyes. A week after the call, Margaret posted an article on LinkedIn about her philanthropic journey. I clicked on it, half out of habit, half out of morbid curiosity. There, in the first paragraph, was a picture of her in a spotless living room, one arm around Theo, my brother, and me blurred in the background, mid-pour with a pitcher of water, hair tied up, face exhausted. She had never asked for permission to use that photo. I remembered that day clearly. It was taken by a photographer from a local charity campaign Margaret had pushed me to agree to. She said it would help raise funds for others like Theo. She said it would give our family a chance to show we care. Naively, I believed her. The article read, "As someone deeply invested in caretaking and community building, I've witnessed firsthand the strength of family during life's darkest moments." Strength of family? I nearly threw up. She had reduced our entire trauma to a line in her resume. And there I was, sweaty, sleep-deprived, barely presentable, being paraded as proof of her compassion. Meanwhile, she hadn't once stayed the night at the hospital. She hadn't changed a single bandage. This wasn't charity. It was branding. I sent her a message. Simple. Direct. "Take that photo down." She replied within minutes. "Oh, come on, you look great in it. Don't be so sensitive." There it was again. That word. Sensitive. As if every justified reaction I ever had was just me being irrational. Margaret was a master at reframing reality until you doubted your own. Then came the invitations. Not to include me, but to assign me. One day, I got an email from my sister with a subject line that read, "Favor for Margaret's event." Inside, a list of errands. Pick up flowers. Confirm catering. Print name cards. No. Please. No. Are you available? Just expectations. When I didn't respond, she texted, "You're not doing much else, right?" Like caregiving was a hobby. Like my entire life had been reduced to the background character they occasionally pulled forward to help decorate. But what pushed me over the edge wasn't the email, or the photo. It was what I overheard at the rehab center. Theo had just finished a grueling physical therapy session, and I was helping him into the wheelchair. In the hallway, I heard two volunteers whispering. "She's Margaret's sister, right?" "Yeah. I think she's like the full-time nurse." "Oh wow. They're lucky to have someone cheap." Cheap. That word clanged in my ears. Not dedicated. Not compassionate. Not loyal. Cheap. I realized then that Margaret had carefully crafted a narrative where I wasn't family. I was staff. I was someone who just happened to be around. A silent helper. Someone whose labor didn't count because it was free. It explained so much. Why I wasn't included in decisions, why no one asked how I was coping, why they felt entitled to assign me tasks without question. They didn't see me as a sister. They saw me as service. And they were proud of that arrangement. Later that night, while Theo was asleep, I went online and searched my name. I knew Margaret's nonprofit site had mentioned us before. Sure enough, there was a full bio about Theo. A courageous young man overcoming immense obstacles with the loving support of family. No mention of me. No name. No identity. But my image was everywhere. Carrying groceries. Holding a medical file. Pushing Theo's chair. Always blurry. Always out of focus. always half-turned like I didn't matter enough to be centered. I closed the laptop and just sat there in the dark. I didn't cry. I was past crying. What I felt now was something colder. Harder. Resolve. If I stayed silent, they'd keep using me. Keep warping the story. Keep turning our pain into their PR. I needed to stop them. But I couldn't just scream into the void and hope someone heard. They were too polished, too practiced, too powerful in their curated little bubble. If I wanted to be heard, I had to be undeniable. The next morning, I created a new email account. Something clean. Untraceable. And I started writing. Not to accuse. Not to vent. But to document. I laid out timelines. Photos. Screenshots. Every email Margaret ever sent asking me to pose for campaigns. Every message where she referred to Theo as inspirational content. Every instance where I'd been made invisible. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it yet. But I knew one thing. They wanted me to stay quiet because it made their lives easier. So I was going to become very, very inconvenient. Before I shut the laptop, I opened the charity's annual report and scrolled to the list of board members. Near the bottom, I saw a name I recognized, a journalist from a local paper. Margaret had brought him up once during dinner, bragging about how she helped him with a quote for a fundraising piece. I smiled. Because sometimes the people who helped build the lie are the first ones to help tear it down, if you give them the truth. Realizations don't always come with clarity. Sometimes they come slowly, like watching fog pull back from a coastline inch by inch. Other times they arrive like thunder, sudden, loud, and impossible to ignore. Mine was a little of both. A quiet accumulation of 1,000 slights, followed by a single moment that made it all click into place. It started with a letter. Theo had been having better days. His physical therapy was grueling but starting to show results. One afternoon, while I was sorting through the mail, I found an envelope addressed to him. The handwriting looked familiar, elegant, precise, formal. I opened it for him, assuming it was a hospital notice or perhaps something from the insurance company. But it wasn't. It was a legal document. A summary of a proposed trust modification. As I read the words, my stomach sank. Theo was being moved into what they called a care designation class, meaning he would no longer have discretionary access to any financial assets from the family estate. Instead, his share would be managed, on his behalf, by a designated trustee. That trustee? Margaret. They hadn't told him. They hadn't even asked? I looked at Theo. He was watching me, waiting for me to explain the letter. They're trying to take away your decision-making rights, I said quietly. He blinked slowly. Then he shook his head. They can't. But I knew they could. Or at least they could try. And if no one fought it, if Theo didn't have someone to intervene, they would succeed. This wasn't a mistake. This was a strategy. I spent the next few days digging through everything. I pulled out bank statements, old emails, anything I had that could help me understand the scope of what they were doing. It was worse than I thought. Margaret hadn't just taken over the family's finances, she'd slowly been folding Theo's name out of every document that once protected him. Investments that had been partially in his name were now fully under her company. Healthcare decisions were being funneled through private providers who reported back to her. And most damning of all? She had used Theo's recovery photos, without our consent, to apply for a federal caregiving grant in her name. She'd been paid thousands of dollars. Money that could have gone to a wheelchair upgrade, a new airbed, or better medication. Instead, it went to Margaret's business. That was the moment the fog truly cleared. They weren't just neglectful. They weren't just callous. They were orchestrating a quiet erasure. One that started with treating me like a maid, and ended with treating Theo like a liability. I needed help. But not just any help. I needed someone who understood how to dismantle a narrative that had been so carefully polished. Someone who understood public perception, legal nuances, and reputational power. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Sarah Klein. Sarah had been a journalist at the local paper back when Theo first had his accident. She had interviewed me once, briefly, about access to healthcare, and I remembered how she asked the right questions. More importantly, I remembered that she actually listened. I sent her a message, not expecting a reply. She answered within hours. We met in a quiet cafe off a street no one in Margaret's circle would ever be caught walking down. I brought a thick folder, carefully labeled and cross-referenced. Sarah listened without interrupting as I laid it all out: the trust documents, the photos, the emails, the financial transfers, the timelines, the discrepancies. By the end of it, her coffee had gone cold. "This is big," she said finally. "I know. You understand the blowback if this goes public." "I do." She leaned forward. "Do you want revenge?" "No," I said, surprising myself. "I want the truth to matter." Sarah nodded. That was the beginning of something I didn't yet know how to name. Over the next several weeks, we worked quietly. She verified documents. She conducted interviews. She followed the paper trail through Margaret's so-called charitable endeavors. What she uncovered was even more damning than I imagined: phony board members, manipulated expense reports, event budgets that didn't match receipts. But she needed something undeniable. Something emotional. Something that would make people care. So I gave her Theo. Not in the exploitative way Margaret did, but the real Theo. His story, his words, his face. He agreed, nervously, but willingly. Sarah sat with him for 3 hours, asking everything from what his relationship with Margaret had been like, to how he felt when he saw himself being used as marketing. He answered everything. Calmly. Honestly. After the interview, Sarah looked at me and said, "This is going to make noise." A few days later, a draft of the article landed in my inbox. The title read, "When Family Becomes PR, The Hidden Cost of Image-Driven Care." I cried when I read it. Not because of what it said, though it was brutal and honest and surgical in its precision, but because it was the first time someone had told our story without editing us out. Theo and I were no longer in the background. We were the center. Sarah gave us a heads up before the piece ran. I used the time to prepare. I called a lawyer. A real one. Not a favor from a friend, but a specialist in trust and estate litigation. I showed her everything. She took the case on the spot. I also reached out to a financial advisor to audit every transaction involving Theo's name over the past 2 years. He found discrepancies, big ones. Transfers that violated fiduciary guidelines. Asset consolidations that required signatures Theo never gave. The same week the article went live, we filed the paperwork. Margaret's office was served with notice. The fallout was instant. The article spread like wildfire, especially in circles that once celebrated Margaret's philanthropy. Donors backed out. The charity board issued a statement of concern. The grant committee launched an investigation. Margaret called me, furious. "How dare you bring this into the public? You brought cameras into my brother's hospital room," I said. "I'm just turning them around. You've ruined my reputation." "No," I replied. "You did that. I just stopped covering for you." She hung up. My sister tried to stay out of it at first. But when she realized she was listed as a co-signer on one of the fraudulent accounts, she panicked. She called me sobbing, begging me to fix it. I told her to call her lawyer. My parents, predictably, stayed silent. But silence doesn't shield you from subpoenas. Within weeks, the estate was frozen. A temporary conservator was appointed to oversee Theo's assets. Margaret's access was revoked. She tried to fight it. She lost. What remained of her public image shattered overnight. The glamorous fundraiser photos? Gone. The curated posts about selfless caregiving? Deleted. But the damage had already been done. For the first time, people saw us. Not as props. Not as problems. But as people. And me? I realized something even deeper through all of this. I had spent years shrinking myself, hoping they'd love me more if I just needed less. But love doesn't require that. Respect doesn't ask for silence. Dignity isn't granted by others. It's claimed. And the moment I stopped waiting for them to do right by me, when I stood up, documented everything, exposed what they tried to hide, that's when I got my power back. Not by screaming. Not by burning bridges. But by building something stronger on the ashes. And for the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and didn't see the blurry girl in the background. I saw the woman who refused to disappear. After the article went live and the paperwork had been filed, the world shifted, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't like a bomb went off. There was no dramatic explosion, no screaming match, no cathartic confrontation at the family estate. No. The fallout from truth doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it settles slowly, like dust after demolition, covering everything with a thick layer of clarity. But before any of that happened, before the court dates and frozen accounts, before the reputations imploded and the false smiles cracked, I had to build the case. Quietly. Carefully. Meticulously. Because the truth, no matter how real, is not enough in a world built on optics and power. You need receipts. I started with the obvious, financial records. I had access to Theo's accounts, the ones still under his name. When we began the process of hiring a private financial auditor, I handed him everything I had: bank statements, monthly bills, tax forms. The man, named David Rener, was a no-nonsense type. Mid-50s, ex-IRS, now working independently because, as he put it, I prefer working for justice over a paycheck. David went line by line. It took him 2 weeks to complete the audit, and when he returned, his face was tight. "You've got enough here to make someone sweat?" he said. According to him, Margaret had moved money around through what he referred to as charitable laundering. She'd created a cycle of transfers between the family estate, the nonprofit she ran, and a shell company she used for event coordination. On paper, it looked legitimate: charity expenses, staff reimbursements, overhead. But when compared to actual receipts? Gaps. Lots of them. One glaring example: a family caregiver retreat Margaret had billed to the nonprofit for $18,000. In reality, it was a weekend at a spa resort for her and her girlfriends. Theo's name was listed as a participant. He had been hospitalized that week. David's eyes narrowed as he flipped the file closed. "This is theft," he said. "Just very well-dressed theft." We compiled everything into a thick binder, tabbed and categorized. I scanned every page into a secure drive. My lawyer advised me not to send anything digitally unless encrypted, so I bought an external hard drive, backed it up 3 times, and stored each copy in a separate location: one at home, one with my lawyer, and one at a friend's house across town. Next, I focused on communications. Emails, texts, voicemails, even social media posts. Every single interaction I had with Margaret over the past 5 years, especially the ones where she asked me to pose with Theo, or referenced his condition as part of her campaigns. One text, dated 2 years ago, was particularly damning. It read, "Make sure Theo wears something clean today. We're filming content for the grant submission. I need him to look sympathetic, not pitiful." Another email. "Can you send over a photo of you feeding him? Something that captures sacrifice. You know, the emotional stuff people eat up." I remember reading that one over and over, feeling physically ill. I forwarded the entire chain to Sarah, the journalist. She asked me for permission to quote the language directly. I said yes. But I didn't stop there. Margaret had hosted dozens of events over the years: galas, fundraisers, charity auctions. All under the guise of supporting caregivers and disabled family members. And each one, carefully photographed, tagged, and shared across platforms. I began capturing every one of these posts, cataloging who was in them, what claims were made, and whether Theo or I were mentioned or depicted. There were many. I found a photo of Margaret giving a speech on stage. Projected behind her was an image of Theo smiling, an old one, before the accident. The caption read, "A family's resilience is our greatest resource. The irony stung. I reached out to one of the photographers listed on the event credits and asked if he still had the original images. He did. I asked if Theo or I had signed any release forms. He checked. We hadn't. That was another legal infraction. Slowly, the story built itself, not from a single smoking gun, but from 1,000 paper cuts Margaret had inflicted with the arrogance of someone who thought no one was watching. Then came the recordings. I had never intended to become the kind of person who recorded family conversations. But after the Zoom call where I was booted without warning, I started keeping track. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd learned something critical. People like Margaret never admit wrongdoing unless you press play. One recording was taken during a brief hospital visit, one of the few times Margaret had shown up. She had brought a videographer. In the clip, you could hear her whispering to me, "Just stand by the bed and hold his hand. It'll look better if we get the shot from the side. Don't look at the camera. You're supposed to be in the moment." Another was from a family dinner, before things fell apart. My sister was complaining about Theo's bills, and Margaret responded with, "He's not going to get better. Might as well make this story worth something." I had to pause that one halfway through the first time I played it back. These weren't just missteps. These were weapons. Carefully chosen words. Pre-calculated gestures. And then, perhaps most surprisingly, I received the package. Unmarked. No return address. Inside was a stack of printed emails, screenshots, and an anonymous note. "You're not the only one she's done this to." It detailed a series of communications between Margaret and a former board member of her nonprofit. Apparently, he had raised concerns about budget discrepancies and had been quietly forced out after a conflict of vision. The documents showed internal discussions about controlling the narrative, even if it meant manipulating financial reports. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. I added the material to my binder, labeled it Whistleblower Documents. That night, I stood in my kitchen staring at the wall. The binder sat open on the table, filled with years of pain, twisted into spreadsheets and screenshots and legal jargon. And still, I hesitated. Because gathering evidence doesn't automatically make you strong. It makes you responsible. Once I had it all, once I had the facts, the proof, the truth, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't pretend it didn't exist. I couldn't fall back into the habit of giving people the benefit of the doubt simply because we shared blood. And that was the hardest part. Not collecting the evidence, but choosing what to do with it. It would have been easier to burn it all, walk away, and let them believe whatever lie gave them comfort. But I kept seeing Theo's face. The night he whispered, "Thank you for not leaving." I had stayed for him. And now, I would fight for him. I met with my lawyer the next morning. We opened the binder and began to prepare for war. They say revenge is best served cold, but I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted something far more powerful, reckoning. By the time the court hearing date was set, everything was in place. The binder of evidence. The financial audit. The whistleblower documents. The photos. The audio recordings. The article had already detonated in public weeks earlier, sending quiet but devastating ripples through Margaret's pristine social image. Her name had disappeared from several charity boards, and online comments had gone from adoring praise to carefully worded, "No longer associated" disclaimers. But none of it felt real until that morning, the day I walked into the courthouse with Theo beside me. He wore a blazer over his hospital tee, and I helped button it over his chest with trembling hands. Not because I was afraid of what was about to happen, but because I had never seen him look so dignified since the accident. He was sitting up taller. His hands didn't shake when he signed the court papers. There was steel in his posture. For once, he wasn't just surviving. He was showing up. We arrived early. My lawyer greeted us with a firm nod and eyes that told me he was ready to draw blood if needed. David, the financial auditor, showed up next, carrying 3 copies of his report. Sarah, the journalist, waited outside, promising not to interfere, but she had her camera, just in case Margaret tried to twist the story once again. Then Margaret arrived. High heels. Crisp beige suit. Designer bag. She looked like she was walking into a business meeting, not a courtroom. She glanced at Theo once and then looked through him like he was invisible. Then her eyes met mine. There it was, the first crack. She wasn't afraid yet, but she was no longer in control. Inside the courtroom, we presented the petition, revoking Margaret's role as financial trustee, freezing any accounts she managed in Theo's name, and launching a formal investigation into misuse of charitable funds. Margaret had brought a lawyer too, a sleek, expensive man with a polished accent and an expensive watch. He smiled a little too easily, as if this would be nothing more than a PR nuisance. Until we started to present. My lawyer walked the court through the financial discrepancies. David confirmed each one with cross-referenced evidence. The judge took notes. The opposing counsel began to shift uncomfortably in his seat. Then came the photos. The email quotes. The recordings. The room grew heavy. At one point, we played the clip where Margaret whispered to me about Theo's clothes and how she wanted him to look sympathetic, not pitiful. Then the one where she laughed about making the story worth something. I looked over at her. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her lawyer stood to object. Context matters. These were personal conversations, not intended for courtroom scrutiny. But the judge waved it off. They were used for personal profit and public campaigns. They're admissible. Then came the final blow. I handed over the anonymous documents, the ones from the whistleblower, detailing budget manipulations, falsified reports, and deliberate erasures. Margaret's lawyer asked for a recess. It was granted. Outside in the hallway, she pulled me aside. "Why are you doing this?" she hissed. "Because you treated us like background props in your self-promotion campaign," I replied. "Because you took money meant for care and used it for cocktails. Because you looked at your own brother, your own blood, and saw only a tax write-off. I gave him a platform. No. You used him as a podium." She clenched her jaw, furious. "I gave you both more than anyone else ever did. And still," I said quietly, "we had to beg." The hearing resumed, and the judge didn't hesitate. Effective immediately, Margaret's financial control was suspended. An independent fiduciary was appointed to manage Theo's trust. A forensic audit of her charity organization was ordered. And pending results, civil charges for financial exploitation were likely to follow. Margaret stood frozen. Her lawyer packed up his briefcase slowly, not meeting her eyes. As the courtroom emptied, I reached for Theo's hand. "We did it," I whispered. He nodded, eyes misty but steady. "I feel clean," he said. That evening, we went home and sat on the balcony. For the first time in a long time, we didn't talk about bills or pain or obligations. We just watched the sun dip behind the horizon. Peaceful. Present. But I wasn't done yet. Because Margaret hadn't just hurt us, she had manipulated others. Families who trusted her charity. Disabled individuals who signed up for support and never got it. Caregivers who were promised help but only received hollow emails and automated replies. So I compiled a final report. With Sarah's help, we published an open resource titled, "How to Spot a Performative Charity." It used Margaret's story, anonymized legally, as a framework to teach others how to audit nonprofits, ask the right questions, and protect themselves. It spread fast. Within a month, 3 other families reached out with similar experiences. One had been pushed out of a caregiving grant after Margaret revised eligibility criteria. Another had been ghosted after providing free services for a fundraiser she never paid them for. Together, we formed a coalition, small, but loud. We weren't just survivors. We were witnesses. And we weren't going away. As for Margaret, she did what people like her always do when they're caught. She tried to rebrand. New Instagram handle. New wellness startup. A few cryptic posts about choosing growth over gossip. But she was radioactive now. Every comment she posted was met with questions. Every partnership attempt got flooded with links to the article. She wasn't cancelled. She was exposed. And there's a difference. Because cancellation implies exile. Exposure means you're still visible, just stripped of illusion. Theo and I didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. We simply sat down, quietly, and started to build something new. Not in defiance, but in freedom. The kind you earn when you stop apologizing for taking up space. The kind that grows in the silence left behind when the people who used to talk over you are finally forced to listen. Some endings aren't loud. They don't arrive with slamming doors or fireworks or dramatic exits. Some endings are quiet, just a stillness where chaos used to live. That's the kind I got. Not cinematic, but sacred. Not a triumph you scream about, but one you feel settle deep in your bones. After the courtroom victory, the dust began to clear. Margaret didn't go to prison, at least not yet. Investigations take time. But her empire cracked, slowly, then completely. Her nonprofit shut down quietly a few months later under the guise of strategic restructuring. Her social accounts went dark. Her sponsored brand deals disappeared. She wasn't exiled, but she was irrelevant now. I didn't revel in her fall. Not really. There was satisfaction, yes. Relief. But what surprised me most was how quickly I stopped thinking about her. The woman who had once occupied so much space in my head now felt like an echo. Faint. Powerless. Because once you learn how to live without someone's approval, you stop fearing their absence. I wish I could say things became easy after that. They didn't. Caring for Theo was still exhausting. Some days he'd cry out in pain, and I'd sit by his bed, holding his hand, unsure what to say. His body healed slowly, imperfectly. The emotional wounds, though? Those went deeper. But we were free now. No more pretending. No more performative photo ops. No more biting our tongues to keep the peace. We were out of the frame. And for the first time, we were in control of our own picture. With the legal dust settling, we focused on reclaiming small things. We redecorated the apartment. Got rid of every gift Margaret had ever given us: furniture, blankets, dishes. It was our symbolic purge. We replaced them with second-hand finds from local thrift shops, pieces that didn't scream status but whispered home. Theo wanted to try something new, painting. He said he liked the idea of creating something nobody could edit. His first painting was abstract. Bold colors. Jagged strokes. But it was raw, honest, full of movement. It looked like chaos finding shape. He titled it, "Not Yours to Use." It sold online within a week. He cried when he found out. That sale paid for the new wheelchair we'd been saving for. I got a part-time job consulting for a nonprofit watchdog organization. I helped families vet charities, understand where donations were actually going, and identify red flags in organizational structures. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every day, I got to use the pain I'd lived through to protect someone else from walking blindly into it. One evening, months later, I got a letter in the mail. It was handwritten. From my father. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what tone would live inside. Guilt? Anger? Defensiveness? But when I read it, I felt nothing. It was 3 pages long. He apologized. Said he didn't know what was really happening. That he had trusted Margaret too much. He mentioned missing Theo's laugh, regretting not being present, and hoping we'd be willing to rebuild. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I set it on a shelf. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed closure from someone who waited until everything fell apart to realize I mattered. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always about offering someone else a clean slate. Sometimes it's about accepting that they were never capable of what you hoped, and letting that be the end of the hoping. My sister reached out once, too. She sent a message through a mutual friend. Said she wanted to talk. I never replied. Not because I hated her, but because I was too busy loving myself for the first time. It's funny how much lighter life feels when you stop dragging around people who only ever saw you as a tool. Theo and I started spending Sundays doing something we'd never done before, nothing. We'd sit in the park. Watch squirrels chase each other. Listen to street musicians. Sometimes we didn't even speak. We didn't need to. Our silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything we'd fought for. One Sunday, a young woman recognized him. "Are you the guy from that article?" she asked, a bit shy. Theo nodded. "Yeah. That's me." She smiled. "You inspired me to quit my internship at a scam charity and start something real." Theo chuckled. "Good for you." After she walked away, he looked at me and said, "I think that's the first time I've ever felt seen." I smiled. "Because now, they're seeing the real you." He nodded slowly. "Thanks for not letting them erase me." It hit me then, what this journey had really been about. Not just revenge. Not even justice. But visibility. In a world where so many people are edited out of their own stories, used, manipulated, silenced, we chose to stand in the frame. Fully. Imperfectly. Authentically. And that is a kind of ending that feels like a beginning. One night, months later, Theo rolled up to me with a gift-wrapped package. "For you," he said. I opened it. It was a painting. Two figures sitting on a bench. One had a cane. The other had paint-stained hands. Behind them, a backdrop of fire, turning into flowers. He titled it, "We Bloom Anyway." I cried. Not the broken kind of crying. The kind that comes from being held, believed, and finally free. That's the ending I got. Not the one I wanted. But the one I earned. Sometimes the greatest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people you once called family. The ones you trusted to catch you when you fell. The ones who told the world they loved you while quietly pushing you aside. This story wasn't just about legal documents, financial exploitation, or photo ops. It was about something much deeper, being erased while you were still breathing. Being edited out of your own life by people who claim to be doing it all for you. What I've learned is this: silence can be just as violent as words. Indifference, just as cruel as hostility. When someone refuses to see your effort, your sacrifice, or your pain, not because they can't, but because acknowledging it would mean facing their own flaws, that's not ignorance. That's a choice. And once you understand that, you're faced with another choice. Will you keep shrinking yourself, hoping to finally be accepted? Or will you stand up and take up the space you've always deserved? I used to think being the good one meant being quiet, helpful, unproblematic. I believed that if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, loved enough, eventually I would be seen. But that version of me never got noticed. Not really. She was easy to ignore, easy to use, easy to forget. The turning point wasn't when they erased Theo from the will, or when they used my face in marketing campaigns without asking. The real turning point was internal, the moment I realized that I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone who was committed to misunderstanding me. The moment I understood that the absence of kindness from others didn't mean I was unworthy of it. People will treat you based on what they think you'll tolerate. Margaret and my sister didn't wake up one day and decide to discard us. It happened in small steps. Each time I stayed silent after a dismissive comment. Each time I accepted being left out of a decision. Each time I let them use my labor, my time, my emotions without boundaries. They took their cues from me. But once I stopped playing that role, everything changed. Taking back control of your life often begins with something deceptively simple: saying no. No to gaslighting. No to emotional manipulation. No to false narratives. No to being the family's silent caretaker while they reap the praise. And saying yes to truth. To dignity. To visibility. Even if it comes at a cost. The process wasn't clean or easy. People got uncomfortable. Some left. Others tried to guilt me into silence. But here's what they don't tell you: discomfort is a good sign. It means the old systems are shaking. It means you're finally making noise in a room that was built to keep you quiet. And then there's forgiveness. Let me be clear, forgiveness does not mean returning to the same dynamics that broke you. It doesn't mean you owe anyone access to your healing. You can forgive someone and still never let them into your life again. Forgiveness, when done right, is less about giving them peace and more about freeing yourself from the weight of their choices. I forgave my father, for his silence, for his absence, but I never forgot what that silence cost me. I didn't hold on to anger. I simply stopped holding on to him. And in that release, I made room for people who saw me. For peace. For new beginnings. The final lesson? You get to rewrite the story. Even if they tried to write you out of it. Even if they spoke over you, cropped you out of the photos, and twisted your voice into something unrecognizable. You get to take it back. Every word. Every moment. Theo and I were background characters in someone else's narrative for too long. But when we decided to tell the truth, not with rage, but with clarity, we didn't just change how people saw us. We changed how we saw ourselves. And once you learn to see yourself clearly, the way you fight changes. You stop chasing approval and start building purpose. You stop asking to be heard and start speaking on your own terms. There is nothing more powerful than that. So if you're reading this and you've ever felt invisible, ever felt like your value depended on how useful you were to someone else, know this. You are not here to serve their version of your story. You are here to live your own. Unedited. Unapologetic. Unbreakable.